The lights of the studio burned brighter than usual, as if even the stage itself anticipated a clash worth remembering. Cameras zoomed in, the crowd hushed. And there she was, Kellyanne Conway, leaning forward with that sharp smile, ready to unleash what she claimed were the facts no one could deny. Her words came fast, rehearsed, sharp like daggers meant to slice through her opponent's credibility. Every number, every statistic rolled off her tongue with the precision of someone who had been here 1,000 times before. She wasn't just speaking, she was striking. To the casual viewer, it felt like the opening bell of a heavyweight fight. Kellyanne swung hard, confident the knockout blow was seconds away. "The truth is simple," she declared, her voice rising with that familiar air of superiority. "The facts don't lie, and the facts say you're wrong." She slammed the papers in front of her for emphasis, each page fluttering like a jab. It wasn't just debate, it was theater, an orchestrated performance designed to corner, to overwhelm, to dominate. The audience leaned forward. Some nodded, others frowned, but all of them were waiting to see if Jasmine Crockett, the newcomer with the calm eyes and unshaken demeanor, could withstand the storm. Kellyanne's record was legendary. She had danced circles around reporters, silenced interviewers, and turned debates upside down with nothing more than her brazen confidence. This, in her mind, would be no different. She smiled again, certain she had Jasmine trapped. Certain this moment would add another tally to her long list of televised triumphs. Kellyanne's voice cut through the silence like a judge's gavel. Final, absolute, untouchable. But the camera caught something. A flicker, just a flicker in Jasmine Crockett's eyes. Not fear, not hesitation. Something else, something sharper. The kind of look that said the storm hadn't rattled her, it had awakened her. The room felt tighter. Even the air seemed. To pause, Kellyanne finished her statement with a smirk, hands folded like the verdict was sealed. Viewers at home thought the match was already decided. But what Jasmine did next wasn't just a response, it was an eruption. The clash between Kellyanne Conway and Jasmine Crockett was never just about a single debate stage. It was about to. America's colliding under the unforgiving spotlight of live television. On one side stood Kellyanne, the seasoned operative, a veteran of political spin. She wasn't called the queen of alternate facts. As an insult, it was a badge she had worn for years, bending reality until it bent to her will. She had survived the most chaotic administration in modern memory, thriving where others had been consumed. She believed that by flooding the room with half-truths and sharp retorts, she could always drown out her opponent, and in many ways she was right. For years, Kellyanne had outpaced critics. When reporters pressed her, she smiled. When interviewers cornered her, she twisted free. Her skill was not in presenting truth. It was in making people question whether truth even mattered. It was an old game, perfected over decades. And tonight, she brought every ounce of that experience to the table. But across from her was someone different. Jasmine Crockett wasn't a career spin artist. She wasn't molded in backroom deals or campaign war rooms. She had come up through the grind of courtroom battles, fighting for voices rarely heard, standing tall for those without power. Jasmine didn't hide behind clever phrasing. She thrived on cutting through noise, on reminding people that clarity is itself a weapon. Where Kellyanne relied on smoke, Jasmine brought fire. That was the tension. This wasn't just a sparring match between two personalities. It was a fight over credibility, over the very notion of who gets to decide what America believes. Kellyanne represented the practiced machinery of manipulation, a figure who had long thrived by controlling the narrative. Jasmine represented something rawer, newer, and far more dangerous to that machinery. Authenticity. The stakes could not have been higher. For Kellyanne, this was about maintaining her grip on relevance, proving she could still dominate in silence. Any rising star. For Jasmine, it was about more than personal victory. It was about showing millions watching at home, immigrants, dreamers, working families, that dignity and truth still had a fighting chance in a world drowning in spin. The studio seemed to embody that tension. The lights blazed hotter. Every Camera angle cut like a blade. Viewers scrolling on their phones saw the clip in real time. Kellyanne's smirk, Jasmine's stillness. Comment threads lit up instantly. Can Crockett handle this? Gosh. Conway's too good at this game. Watch. She crush her. The judgment had already begun before Jasmine spoke a word. And that was exactly why this moment mattered. Because in politics, perception often becomes reality. If Kellyanne succeeded, she wouldn't just embarrass Jasmine, she would cement the idea that truth itself could be steamrolled by sheer arrogance. If Jasmine rose, even for a moment, it would be a crack in that illusion. Audiences didn't know it yet, but they were sitting at the edge of a turning point. This wasn't going to be another night where Kellyanne walked away victorious, another notch in her belt of televised conquests. Something electric was about to shift. No one expected that in under 30 seconds. The momentum of the debate would flip, long before the lights of this debate stage burned against her face. Kellyanne Conway had already carved her name into the granite walls of American political history. To some, she was a master strategist. To others, she was the architect of confusion. But no one friend or foe could deny that she was a survivor. When the Trump era descended like a storm over Washington, dozens of political operatives were swept away by scandal, fired in disgrace, or drowned under the relentless scrutiny of the press. Yet Kellyanne remained. Through every headline, every controversy, every attack, she found a way to pivot, spin, and twist the narrative until the impossible seemed believable. Her weapon was not true, it was confidence. She wielded it with such precision that even the most outlandish claims felt, for a fleeting moment, unshakable. Reporters would challenge her, throw data in her face, even laugh at the absurdity of her statements. Still, she would hold her gaze, smile politely, and double down. That was her genius. She never gave her opponents the satisfaction of seeing her flinch. One infamous moment cemented her reputation forever. A journalist had pressed her on blatant falsehoods emerging from the administration she served. Kellyanne didn't falter. Instead, she introduced a phrase that would echo through history: alternative facts. The words seemed almost absurd, laughable in their audacity. Yet in uttering them, she did something remarkable. As she reframed the debate entirely. No longer was it about accuracy, it was about perspective. In that instant, truth became negotiable, and millions were left frustrated, screaming at their screens, realizing that facts themselves had been placed on trial. That was the Conway method. She didn't need to prove reality. She only needed to create enough doubt, enough fog, that people questioned whether reality could even be proven. A single contradiction here, a cherry-picked statistic there. A flash of indignation sprinkled in all layered, to overwhelm and exhaust. By the time her opponents tried to untangle her statements, the debate had already moved on. She thrived in the chaos she created. Her legacy was built on that very chaos. She had sparred with the sharpest anchors in the business, and most of them walked away bloodied. Seasoned politicians who believed in rational discourse often found themselves stumbling under her rapid-fire delivery. She knew how to weaponize numbers without context, how to spin polls into prophecies, how to flip accusations back onto her challengers until they looked defensive and weak. She wasn't just arguing, she was performing, and for years the stage belonged to her. This is why, for so many viewers, she inspired not just anger, but exhaustion. People would watch her glide through interviews and feel the ache of helplessness. They saw someone play word games with the very fabric of truth, and too often they watched her win. They remembered the moments where journalists tried to pin her down and ended up tangled in her web instead. They remembered the smirks, the sly tilts of her head, the way she dismissed genuine outrage as if it were nothing but background noise. For her allies, this made her invaluable. She was the shield and the sword. For her critics, it made her infuriating. Because how do you defeat someone who doesn't play by the rules of truth at all? How do you win against a person who treats every question as an opportunity to redirect, to distort, to dominate? And that was the weight Jasmine Crockett carried as she stepped into this confrontation. This wasn't a debate against an ordinary opponent. It was a collision with a veteran spin doctor, someone who had spent decades perfecting the art of slipperiness. Kellyanne Conway had made a career out of leaving adversaries looking bewildered, flustered, and humiliated. She didn't just win arguments, she dismantled reputations. The expectation was simple. Jasmine would crumble.
Ow.
She would stumble over Kellyanne's rapid-fire delivery, struggled to correct the twisted numbers, and leave the stage battered like so many before her. That was the narrative Kellyanne trusted. It's the pattern she had repeated for years. Asterisk, but there was one thing she hadn't prepared for. One opponent she hadn't studied. Jasmine Crockett wasn't like the others, and Kellyanne never saw it coming. Before the bright lights of the studio and the roar of an audience waiting for spectacle, Jasmine Crockett's story began in a far different place. She was not raised in the shadow of political machines or trained in the art of spin. Her journey was rooted in grit, in late nights hunched over case files, the kind of battles most people never see, but countless communities depend on. Jasmine came of age in courtrooms, not green rooms. Her arena was the law, her weapon was the truth, and her mission was to stand tall for those who had been ignored, dismissed, or silenced. She built her name not by chasing cameras, but by representing people who had none. Tenants bullied by landlords, workers cheated by employers, citizens targeted by systems designed to break them down. Jasmine listened, fought, and refused to retreat. Every case taught her resilience. Every ruling honed her resolve. For her, victory was never measured by applause. It was measured by the dignity restored to someone who thought the world had forgotten them. This background made her different. Where Kellyanne Conway thrived on performance and illusion, Jasmine had been sharpened in the crucible of real stakes. Her clients weren't ratings or poll numbers. They were families, immigrants, and workers whose lives hung on whether she could outthink and outfight the forces stacked against them. That responsibility demanded clarity, demanded fearlessness, demanded a voice that would not tremble even when the odds seemed insurmountable. From those early years, Jasmine learned something profound. The truth, delivered with precision, is its own form of fire. You don't need to shout when your words cut like steel. You don't need to drown out the noise when your logic dismantles it piece by piece. This was her secret weapon, not the chaos of spin, but the calm power of facts anchored in principle. Rise in public life reflected that same authenticity. She didn't climb ladders built by political dynasties. She carved her own path, often against resistance, often in spaces where she was underestimated before she even opened her mouth. Yet, time and again, she turned skepticism into respect. People remembered her not for gimmicks or showmanship, but for the way she carried herself with conviction, with purpose, with unapologetic truth. And so, she entered the halls of power. She carried with her the stories of those she had fought for. She carried the weight of their struggles, the echoes of their voices, that history gave her something that couldn't be rehearsed or manufactured: credibility. She was not speaking abstractly about justice or equality. She had lived in the trenches of those battles. That is what made the impending clash with Kellyanne Conway so compelling. On paper, the two women could not have been more different. Kellyanne, a fixture of Washington theatrics, had built her empire on bending reality until it suited her. Jasmine, by contrast, had risen on the back of stubborn truth-telling on her refusal to let powerful systems twist the lives of ordinary people. Kellyanne's strength was manipulation. Jasmine's was authenticity. The stage was set for collision. Smoke versus fire. Spin versus steel. Illusion versus integrity. For Kellyanne, the debate was just another chance to perform, to dominate, to outmaneuver. For Jasmine, it was something deeper. It was a chance to show every young woman, every immigrant child, every worker who had ever been silenced, that the truth still had teeth. This wasn't just about defending herself against Kellyanne's barrage of facts. It was about defending the very idea that facts mattered, that dignity mattered, that arrogance could be challenged. She knew Kellyanne's tactics. She had studied them from afar, like anyone who watched in frustration as Kellyanne danced circles around interviewers. But Jasmine wasn't interested in playing Kellyanne's game. She was preparing to rewrite the rules entirely. Every battle she had fought before prepared her for this stage. The courtroom silences where a single objection could change everything. The tense negotiations where a carefully placed word flipped the balance of power. The uphill fights where everyone said she would lose, till she didn't. All of that training, all of that resilience coiled inside her as she sat beneath the studio lights, listening to Kellyanne fire off her barrage of numbers and smirks. And that was the difference. Kellyanne believed she could bury Jasmine under a mountain of facts, but Jasmine had no intention of being buried. She had faced systems more intimidating than Kellyanne Conway. She had stared down injustices larger than this debate. She'd already proven time and again that when the pressure was highest, her clarity burned brightest. And so, as Kellyanne leaned forward with her smirk of certainty, Jasmine remained steady. No panic, no fluster, no scrambling, just that quiet, razor-sharp resolve forged over years of struggle. The resolve of someone who knew exactly what was coming, and exactly how to answer it. And when Kellyanne tried to bury her with facts, Jasmine had something sharper. The opening minutes of the debate unfolded like a storm. Kellyanne Conway moved first, and she moved fast. Her voice came sharp and unrelenting, flooding the air with statistics, sound bites, and historical comparisons that she rattled off as if they were scripture. It wasn't dialogue, it was a barrage. Every number was punctuated by a dismissive laugh, every line delivered with the confidence of someone who had rehearsed the knockout punch. She interrupted, overlapped, cut in before Jasmine could fully respond. Kellyanne didn't just want to win the exchange, she wanted to smother it. Viewers leaned forward, caught in the whirlwind of her delivery. To the untrained eye, it looked like dominance. She moved like a boxer, throwing combinations, never letting her opponent breathe. That was the tactic: overwhelm, confuse, bury. Make the other side look hesitant by sheer force of noise. But Jasmine Crockett didn't flinch. She sat upright, hands folded, listening. Her eyes followed Kellyanne's every word. Her expression unchanging. She didn't rush to interject. She didn't raise her voice to match the onslaught. She allowed the storm to rage, steady as stone against the wind. And in that stillness, a different kind of power began to emerge. The audience could feel the tension building. Could Jasmine hold her ground? Could she withstand this kind of verbal artillery? Kellyanne had turned seasoned journalists into stammering messes with far less effort. Many viewers watching at home expected the same. But Jasmine's silence wasn't weakness, it was calculation. Every fact hurled at her, every interruption, every smug chuckle was being stored, measured, weighed. Kellyanne misread it entirely. To her, Jasmine's composure looked like paralysis. She mistook patience for defeat, and so she pressed harder. Her voice rose in pitch, her hands cut the air with exaggerated motions. "These are the numbers, Congresswoman," she said with that signature smirk, "and numbers don't lie." "What do you even say to that?" the crowd murmured. Some nodded in agreement, others frowned, waiting for a counter. But Jasmine still did not speak. She waited, letting the echo of Kellyanne's words fill the room, letting the audience sit in the smug certainty of the so-called facts. Kellyanne leaned back, convinced she had cornered her opponent. It was the classic Conway rhythm flood. The space choke out opposition, then bask in the illusion of victory. And for a moment, it seemed to be working. Even the moderators glanced at Jasmine, as though wondering if she had lost her footing. But then, something subtle happened. Jasmine shifted in her chair. It's not much, just enough for the cameras to catch. Her body leaned forward slightly, her eyes narrowed with precision. She wasn't rattled. She wasn't silenced. She was ready. And in that instant, the atmosphere in the room changed. The murmurs quieted. The cameras zoomed closer. Everyone watching, both in the studio and across the country, sensed it. The storm was about to meet the wall it couldn't break. And then Jasmine leaned in, and the atmosphere shifted. The silence before Jasmine spoke stretched like an eternity. The studio lights felt hotter, brighter, the kind of glare that exposes cracks and amplifies nerves. Kellyanne leaned back with that familiar smirk, convinced she had landed the final blow. Her hands rested casually on the desk, signaling to the cameras, "I've already won." But then Jasmine leaned forward, just slightly, enough to signal that something was about to change. Her voice, when it came, wasn't rushed, wasn't defensive. It was deliberate, calm, sharper than a blade. "Kellyanne," Jasmine began, her tone steady, "you say numbers don't lie, but the way you use them, they stop being numbers. They become props." The audience shifted. A low murmur rippled through the studio. Jasmine had just called out the very foundation of Kellyanne's tactic, not by shouting it down, but by reframing it with surgical precision. Kellyanne blinked, her smirk faltering for just a fraction of a second. Jasmine continued, her pacing immaculate. She let each phrase land, then paused, forcing the weight of her words to linger. "You can cherry-pick statistics. You can cut context out of a sentence. You can stack numbers like a tower of cards. But when the people living those numbers tell a different story, your tower collapses." Gasps. A few claps. The tension had shifted. Kellyanne sat a little straighter now, her eyes narrowing. The audience sensed it. Jasmine wasn't countering. She was dismantling. Kellyanne jumped in, trying to interrupt. "But the facts," Jasmine raised a hand, not aggressively, just enough to signal she wasn't finished. The confidence in that simple gesture was undeniable. It wasn't defiance. It was control. The moderators didn't cut her off. The audience hushed. Kellyanne had owned the floor minutes ago, but Jasmine now commanded it. "Let's talk about those facts you threw out," Jasmine pressed, her gaze locked on Kellyanne. "You cited job numbers, right? It's conveniently ignoring who benefited and who was left behind. You mentioned crime statistics while glossing over the communities most impacted by policy failures you defended. You spoke of economic growth but didn't mention how many Americans worked 2 jobs just to stay afloat. Every you mentioned hit like a drumbeat, point by point, layer by layer." Jasmine was using Kellyanne's own ammunition and turning it into evidence against her. The audience responded audibly, now applause breaking out in bursts. Some gasps when Jasmine called out contradictions, murmurs of, "That's right." From the back rows, the moderator's eyes widened. Commentators on live feed scrambled for words. Kellyanne's mask began to crack. Her smirk tightened into a half-frown. She shuffled her papers, something she rarely did on camera. It was a tell. The overconfidence was thinning, Jasmine pressed. "Further, facts matter, truth matters. But twisting facts until they serve only power? That's not truth-telling. That's manipulation." The room erupted in applause. Some stood. For the first time, Kellyanne's armor looked dented. She tried again, this time with more edge. "You're ignoring the reality, Congresswoman," but Jasmine didn't let the interruption rattle her. She leaned in closer, her voice cutting through Kellyanne's like a scalpel. "Reality isn't what you say it is, Kellyanne. Reality is what millions of Americans live every single day. And no matter how many times you spin it, they know what's true because they're living." It was the line that broke the atmosphere wide open. Cheers erupted. The camera caught faces in the audience, mouths open in shock, heads nodding vigorously, some clapping until their palms reddened. Kellyanne's face flushed. She tried to regain ground, leaning into her old rhythm, speed, volume, interruption. But it no longer worked. Jasmine had shifted the battlefield. Every stat Kellyanne threw was instantly reframed. Every jab turned into a setup for Jasmine's counter, one by one. Jasmine took Kellyanne's facts and flipped them like cards. In a magician's trick, each reveal exposed the hollowness behind them. Every attempted knockout punch became a stepping stone for Jasmine's takedown. The suspense tightened like a coil. Viewers watching at home could feel it. They weren't just witnessing a debate, they were witnessing a reversal. Kellyanne Conway, the master of spin, was being unraveled in real time. Jasmine slowed her cadence, lowering her voice so that every listener had to lean in. "You came here tonight expecting to bury me in numbers, but what you forgot is that numbers don't just belong to you. They belong to the people, and the people deserve more than spin. They deserve the truth. The audience roared. Some clapped. Others whistled. The commentators whispered on hot mics, "She's flipping it. She's actually flipping it." Kellyanne's jaw clenched. She tried a final counter. "Well, that's your opinion." Jasmine cut her off not by shouting, but by speaking softer, firmer, deadlier. "No, Kellyanne. That's reality. And tonight, reality wins." The room erupted like thunder. The applause was no longer polite, was explosive. Some audience members stood on their feet, clapping above their heads. Even one of the moderators let a small smile slip. Kellyanne froze for a moment, her face tight with frustration. The confidence she carried into the debate had dissolved. Her eyes darted, searching for footing, but there was none. The momentum had flipped completely. Every fact Kellyanne had thrown, every statistic, every talking point had become a brick. Jasmine Crockett had used those bricks to build a towering argument that Kellyanne couldn't climb. The flip was complete. The studio felt electric, buzzing with the aftermath of what they had just witnessed. Commentators would later call it the moment Kellyanne Conway lost her grip. Viewers at home flooded social media with clips, memes, and hashtags celebrating Jasmine's mic drop moment. But the story didn't end there. 'Cause what Jasmine unleashed on that stage wasn't confined to the walls of the studio. It ricocheted across the nation. The moment the studio lights dimmed and the cameras cut, the internet was already ablaze. Within minutes, the clip of Jasmine Crockett's counterattack began circulating across platforms like wildfire. Twitter, TikTok, Instagram, Facebook, every timeline was saturated. Hashtags formed like rolling thunder. Hashtag Crockett Clapback. Hashtag facts via spin. Hashtag Jasmine wins. Each tag wasn't just digital noise. It was proof that people had been waiting for this. Waiting for someone to not just survive a Kellyanne Conway broadside, but to flip it back with precision, with fire, with dignity. By the end of the first hour, millions had already watched. By nightfall, commentators were calling it the moment of the week. One headline screamed, "Crockett just schooled a Trump veteran." Another declared, "Kellyanne finally met her match." The language was raw, unfiltered, charged with the kind of excitement usually reserved for a championship upset. That's what it felt like. A rookie fighter taking down the seasoned heavyweight. In front of a roaring crowd, but it wasn't just the political class watching. Everyday people, students, workers, parents, were sharing the clip with captions like, "This is what we've been waiting for," or, "Finally, someone who doesn't back down." Memes popped up faster than anyone could count. One viral edit showed Kellyanne's words dissolving into smoke, while Jasmine's reply appeared like a sword cutting through the haze. Another showed a split screen. Kellyanne flustered, Jasmine calm-captioned, alternate facts versus actual receipts. Even those who had never heard of Jasmine Crockett before were suddenly invested. "Who is she?" became a trending search. On Google, clips from her past speeches resurfaced, fans digging up moments where her sharp tongue and unwavering poise foreshadowed this very battle. Each discovery only fueled the fire, painting her not as a lucky newcomer, but as a fighter, forged through years of defending truth against power. And then came the grudging respect. Even voices from the other side, people who normally cheered Kellyanne's sparring victories, admitted sometimes reluctantly that Jasmine had landed the heavier blow. She held her own, one conservative commentator said, his tone stiff, almost unwilling. Another confessed on air Conway isn't often caught off guard, but tonight she was rattled. That was the kind of acknowledgement Jasmine didn't even have to chase. It came to her because her performance was undeniable. The shockwaves weren't just about a viral clip, they were about symbolism. Kellyanne had stood for years as a symbol of Trumpier defiance, the queen of spin who turned lies into weapons. But in that one exchange, Jasmine became the symbol of something else: clarity, courage, and the audacity to speak truth without flinching. People didn't just see a debate, they saw a changing of the guard. Students began quoting her lines in group chats. Organizers clipped her words into short motivational edits. Teachers discussed her composure in classrooms. Even late-night comedians built monologues around the confrontation, replaying the moment where Kellyanne's smirk faltered and Jasmine's eyes sharpened. Everywhere you turned, it was Crockett's moment. Every fact Kellyanne had thrown, every statistic. Every talking point had become a brick. And Jasmine Crockett had used those bricks to build a towering argument that Kellyanne couldn't climb. The flip was complete. The studio felt electric, buzzing with the aftermath of what they had just witnessed. Commentators would later call it the moment Kellyanne Conway lost her grip. Viewers at home flooded social media with clips, memes, and hashtags celebrating Jasmine's mic drop moment. But the story didn't end there. Because what Jasmine unleashed on that stage wasn't confined to the walls of the studio. It ricocheted across the nation. The moment the studio lights dimmed and the cameras cut, the internet was already ablaze. Within minutes, the clip of Jasmine Crockett's counterattack began circulating across platforms like wildfire. Twitter, TikTok, Instagram, Facebook, every timeline was saturated. Hashtags formed like rolling thunder. Hashtag Crockett Clapback. Hashtag Facts vs Spin. Hashtag Jasmine wins. Each tag wasn't just digital noise. It was proof that people had been waiting for this. Waiting for someone to not just survive a Kellyanne Conway broadside, but to flip it back with precision, with fire, with dignity. By the end of the first hour, millions had already watched. By nightfall, commentators were calling it the moment of the week. One headline screamed, "Crockett just schooled a Trump veteran." Another declared, "Kellyanne finally met her match." The language was raw, unfiltered, charged with the kind of excitement usually reserved for a championship upset, because that's what it felt like, a rookie fighter taking down the seasoned heavyweight. In front of a roaring crowd, but it wasn't just the political class watching. Everyday people, students, workers, parents, were sharing the clip with captions like, "This is what we've been waiting for," or, "Finally, someone who doesn't back down." Memes popped up faster than anyone could count. One viral edit showed Kellyanne's words dissolving into smoke, while Jasmine's reply appeared like a sword cutting through the haze. Another showed a split screen. Kellyanne flustered, Jasmine calm captioned, "Alternate facts versus actual receipts." Even those who had never heard of Jasmine Crockett before were suddenly invested. Who is she? It became a trending search on Google. Clips from her past speeches resurfaced, fans digging up moments where her sharp tongue and unwavering poise foreshadowed this very battle. Each discovery only fueled the fire, painting her not as a lucky newcomer, but as a fighter forged through years of defending truth against power. And then came the grudging respect. Even voices from the other side, people who normally cheered Kellyanne's sparring victories, admitted sometimes reluctantly that Jasmine had landed the heavier blow. She held her own, one conservative commentator said, his tone stiff, almost unwilling. Another confessed on-air Conway isn't often caught off guard, but tonight she was rattled. That was the kind of acknowledgement Jasmine didn't even have to chase. Came to her because her performance was undeniable. The shockwaves weren't just about a viral clip. They were about symbolism. Kellyanne had stood for years as a symbol of Trump-era defiance, the queen of spin who turned lies into weapons. But in that one exchange, Jasmine became the symbol of something else: clarity, courage, and the audacity to speak truth without flinching. People didn't just see a debate, they saw a changing of the guard. Students began quoting her lines in group chats. Organizers clipped her words into short motivational edits. Teachers discussed her composure in classrooms. Even late-night comedians built monologues around the confrontation, replaying the moment where Kellyanne's smirk faltered and Jasmine's eyes sharpened. Everywhere you turned, it was Crockett's moment, and yet the real victory wasn't measured in applause or clicks. It wasn't even in Kellyanne's silence. The true victory was what Jasmine's words represented: a generation refusing to be intimidated, a voice rising from the people who had been dismissed, doubted, and disregarded. Her rebuttal wasn't just for Kellyanne, it was for everyone. Who had ever been told they didn't belong in the arena? What Jasmine said inside that studio was powerful. But what it sparked outside, that was history echoing forward. The studio debate was over, but the ricochet was only beginning. Cliffhanger. And in the days ahead, those words would carry far beyond a trending hashtag, reaching into the very heart of America's struggle over who gets to define truth. When the dust settled, It was clear that what unfolded on that stage was larger than a clash of two women with opposing ideologies. It was a clash between two very different definitions of power. Kellyanne Conway wielded her statistics and talking points like blades, sharp but hollow, slicing through surface arguments with practiced speed. Jasmine Crockett, however, carried something Kellyanne could never replicate: integrity. And in the end, that was the difference. Jasmine reframed Kellyanne's attack into something greater than political theater. She showed that facts without integrity are not truths, they are weapons. A stat twisted out of context can wound, but it cannot heal. A rehearsed line may silence for a moment, but it cannot enlighten. Kellyanne's performance was about dominance. Jasmine's was about clarity. One sought to control the narrative. The other sought to reveal it. The deeper truth Jasmine demonstrated was that dignity and courage transformed debate into revelation. She didn't match Kellyanne's interruptions. With interruptions of her own, she didn't let her composure slip into shouting matches. She leaned into patience, wielding silence as power, and then punctured Kellyanne's barrage with words sharp enough to slice through noise, yet calm enough to stand on their own. That balanced the calm fire. The razor logic wasn't just effective, it was transformative. In that moment, Jasmine reminded the nation that the stage doesn't belong to those who speak the loudest. It belongs to those who speak with purpose. She reminded everyone watching that courage isn't found in domination but in restraint, and that true leadership is not measured in volume but in vision. The moral was unmistakable. Truth is greater than manipulation. Service to people is greater than service to spin. And dignity, when tested under fire, shines brighter than any clever line rehearsed in a strategist's playbook. Kellyanne walked in with a battle plan. Jasmine walked in with a promise to herself, to her constituents, to anyone who had ever been silenced, that she would not bend, not bow, and not break. The cinematic climax was more than applause. It was the sight of Kellyanne's confidence cracking under the weight of her own tactics. Contrasted with Jasmine's steady rise, the words Jasmine left behind weren't just a retort, they were a reclamation. She didn't just win the debate. She reclaimed the stage for every voice once drowned out, every truth once buried under spin, every person who had been told they weren't sharp enough, tough enough, or polished enough to survive in that arena. That is why the clip reverberated. So far, and so fast, it wasn't merely entertaining, it was instructive. Viewers saw in Jasmine a reminder of what courage looks like when placed against cynicism. They saw that composure could be louder than interruption, and that clarity could be stronger than chaos. It wasn't just politics. It was a lesson in courage. And that perhaps was the most lasting takeaway. Long after hashtags faded, long after the news cycle moved on, people would remember not just what Jasmine said, but how she said it. They would remember that courage isn't about the absence of fear, it's about the refusal to yield. They would remember that truth, spoken calmly in the face of manipulation, can cut deeper than any barrage of spin. Because in the end, Jasmine Crockett didn't simply face down Kellyanne Conway. She stood as proof that when integrity walks into a room, no amount of deception can hold the floor. Kellyanne Conway walked onto that stage with the confidence of someone who believed she could corner her opponent. She had the stats, the interruptions, the polished delivery, but in a matter of minutes, Jasmine Crockett flipped the entire stage. She didn't need to shout. She didn't need to dominate. With calm, fire, and razor logic, Jasmine transformed the debate into a revelation and left Kellyanne grasping at the pieces of her own performance. This was more than a clash of words. It was a reminder. Dignity always silences arrogance. Facts without integrity crumble. Manipulation may win the moment, but truth endures. Jasmine showed that courage, patience, and composure can dismantle even the sharpest political spin. And in doing so, she didn't just claim victory for herself, she claimed it for every voice that refuses to be silenced. That's why her performance matters beyond the studio walls, because when someone stands up with truth on their side, it resonates, it spreads, it inspires. So here's the call. If you believe truth should always overpower manipulation, Share this moment. Let it echo further. Let it remind people that courage has a place in politics and that integrity can stand taller than arrogance. And if you want to see more moments where the underestimated rise, where truth slices through spin, and where voices like Jasmine Crockett's rewrite the story of America, subscribe. Join the movement. Add your voice to the chorus that refuses to be drowned out. Because this wasn't just a debate, this was a spark. And together we can make sure it lights up the whole nation.